You want to know what your precious company cost me? My father is dead. Dead. My baby. I lost my baby because of you.
The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor, crystal fragments scattering like diamonds across Dae-hyun Kang's custom Italian shoes. He didn't flinch. Across the penthouse living room, Grace stood with her arms crossed, eyes blazing with a fury that made the San Francisco skyline behind her seem dim by comparison. "You want to know what your precious company cost me?" she said, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "My father is dead, Dae-hyun. Dead. My baby." Her voice cracked. "I lost my baby because of you." Dae-hyun felt the ground shift beneath him, the carefully constructed world he'd built crumbling like the shattered glass at his feet. This wasn't how the bet was supposed to go. This wasn't supposed to matter. But it did. God help him. It did. Talk months earlier. The rooftop lounge overlooked the glittering expanse of San Francisco's financial district, a playground for the city's elite where deals worth millions were sealed with handshakes and expensive scotch. Dae-hyun moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of someone who had never known failure, his tailored Tom Ford suit catching the amber glow of strategically placed lighting. At 32, he'd built Kang Tech Industries into a fintech empire that made competitors nervous and investors salivate. Min-jae found him at the bar, that familiar smirk playing across his face. They'd known each other since their undergraduate days at Stanford, a friendship built on competition and mutual respect, though the former often overshadowed the latter. "Still collecting trophies, I see," Min-jae said, gesturing to the crowd of admirers Dae-hyun had just left behind. "Business acquisitions, luxury cars, beautiful women. Tell me, Dae-hyun, is there anything you can't have?" Dae-hyun accepted a glass of 18-year-old single malt from the bartender without looking at him. "Is this going somewhere, or are you just making observations about my success?" "I'm proposing a wager." Min-jae leaned against the bar, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "You pride yourself on being able to acquire anything, control any situation, but I think there's someone who would be completely immune to your particular brand of charm and manipulation. Everyone has a price, Min-jae. You know that. Not Grace Johnson." The name meant nothing to Dae-hyun initially, but Min-jae was already pulling up an article on his phone. A professional headshot showed a striking woman with natural hair styled in an elegant updo, intelligent eyes staring directly at the camera with unwavering confidence. The headline read, "Financial Analyst Exposes Predatory Practices in Tech Acquisitions." "She published this report last month," Min-jae explained. "Specifically called out Kang Tech's hostile takeover tactics. She's brilliant, principled, and by all accounts, completely incorruptible. The exact opposite of the type you usually pursue." Dae-hyun scanned the article, his jaw tightening at several pointed criticisms of his business model. "And you want me to what? Wine and dine her until she retracts her analysis? Better. I want you to marry her." The scotch paused halfway to Dae-hyun's lips. "Excuse me. 6 months. You marry Grace Johnson and stay married for half a year. If you succeed, I'll sign over the rights to the blockchain patent we've been fighting over, plus $2 million. This is insane, even for you. Are you declining?" Min-jae's smile widened. "I never thought I'd see Dae-hyun Kang back down from a challenge." The words hit their mark exactly as Min-jae intended. Dae-hyun had built his empire on never refusing a challenge, never showing weakness, never admitting something was beyond his reach. His parents had immigrated to America with nothing, worked themselves to exhaustion to give him opportunities, and he'd repaid that sacrifice by becoming ruthlessly successful. Backing down wasn't in his vocabulary. "You'll need her agreement, of course," Min-jae added. "I may have already mentioned the possibility to her." "And she said?" "She said she'd consider meeting with you." "Interesting, don't you think? Most people in her position would have refused outright." Dae-hyun studied the photo again. There was something in Grace's expression, a steel behind her eyes that suggested Min-jae might be right about her being different. But different only made the challenge more intriguing. In his experience, everyone wanted something. The key was figuring out what that something was and using it to his advantage. "Set up the meeting," Dae-hyun said finally. "Let's see if Miss Johnson is as incorruptible as you claim." 3 days later, Dae-hyun sat in a private room at one of San Francisco's most exclusive sushi restaurants, the kind of place where reservations required 3 months' notice and connections most people didn't have. He'd arranged everything perfectly. The omakase tasting menu, imported sake that cost more per bottle than most. People's monthly rent, fresh orchids flown in from Thailand that morning. Every detail calculated to impress. Grace arrived exactly on time, which somehow annoyed him. She wore a navy blue pantsuit that was professional without being severe, minimal jewelry, and an expression of polite curiosity that gave nothing away. As she sat across from him, Dae-hyun deployed his most disarming smile. "Miss Johnson, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I know who you are, Mr. King." Her voice was smooth, controlled. "And I know why you asked me here. Min-jae already told me everything about your little wager." Dae-hyun's carefully prepared opening died on his lips. He'd expected to lead this conversation, to reveal the bet on his own terms, to maintain control. Her directness threw him completely off balance. "I see. Then you know that you and your friend think it would be entertaining to see if you can manipulate me into marrying you for 6 months. Yes, I'm aware." Grace accepted a cup of tea from the server without breaking eye contact with Dae-hyun. "What I don't think you know is why I agreed to this meeting. Enlighten me. I have my reasons for saying yes to your proposition. Reasons that have nothing to do with your money or your charm, both of which you clearly have in abundance, but neither of which interest me in the slightest." Dae-hyun leaned back, reassessing. Women usually responded to him in predictable ways. Flattery, flirtation, carefully performed disinterest that masked genuine interest. Grace was doing none of these things. She was treating this like a business negotiation, which paradoxically made it more personal than any interaction he'd had in years. "What are your reasons?" "That's my business. But understand this, Mr. Kang. If we do this, it will be on my terms as much as yours. I'm not interested in being your trophy or your challenge or whatever else you see me as. 6 months, then we're done. But you might not be the same person when this is over." Something in her tone sent an unexpected chill down Dae-hyun's spine. There was a weight to her words, a certainty that suggested she knew something he didn't. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Dae-hyun felt a flicker of uncertainty. "You're confident," he said. "I'm realistic. You think you can charm or intimidate or buy your way through this. You can't, but by all means, try. It will make the next 6 months more interesting." She stood, leaving her tea untouched, and placed a business card on the table. "My office, Tuesday at 3. We'll discuss terms." Dae-hyun watched her walk away, her posture radiating quiet confidence. For the first time since Min-jae proposed the bet, he wondered if he'd underestimated the situation. Tuesday's meeting took place not in some upscale location of Dae-hyun's choosing, but in a small cafe in Oakland that Grace selected. The neighborhood was working class, diverse, vibrant in a way that is usual. Haunts in the financial district could never be. Dae-hyun felt conspicuously out of place in his Brioni suit as he navigated past families and students and people living normal, unglamorous lives. Grace was already there, typing on a laptop, a simple cup of coffee beside her. She looked up as he approached, and Dae-hyun caught something in her expression before she masked it. Recognition? No. Something deeper. Something that looked almost like satisfaction. "You came," she said simply. "Did you think I wouldn't? I thought you might send a representative. Men like you don't usually venture outside their comfort zones." Dae-hyun sat across from her in a chair that wobbled slightly. "I'm here. What are your terms?" Grace closed her laptop with deliberate care. "I keep my job, I keep my apartment, though I understand appearances require me to spend some time at your place. We maintain separate bedrooms, No public displays beyond what's necessary to maintain the fiction. No social media, posts. And most importantly, complete independence. I'm not your accessory. Anything else? Yes. When the 6 months are up, we end it cleanly. No complications, no extensions, no attempts to renegotiate. We walk away. Agreed. Though I should mention, people who spend time with me typically don't want to walk away. Grace's smile was sharp enough to cut. I'm not typical people, Mr. Kang. You'll learn that soon enough. The civil ceremony at City Hall was as perfunctory and emotionless as a business contract signing. Dae-hyun's assistant served as one witness, a colleague of Grace's as the other. No family, no friends, no celebration. The clerk seemed puzzled by the cool efficiency of it all, perhaps expecting at least a hint of romance or affection. She found none. When they arrived at Dae-hyun's penthouse in the Soma district, he expected the usual reaction he got from everyone who saw his home for the first time. Awe at the floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the bay, appreciation for the minimalist design that had been featured in Architectural Digest, envy at the obvious wealth on display. Instead, Grace walked through the space with clinical assessment, finally pointing to a small guest room near the back. "This will work for me," she said. "That's the smallest bedroom in the unit. I don't need much space, and I prefer the morning light from that window." She began unpacking her modest suitcase, and Dae-hyun noticed with growing frustration that she'd brought almost nothing. Practical clothes, a few books, basic toiletries. No evening gowns for the social events he'd planned. No designer anything, nothing that suggested she intended to take advantage of his lifestyle. "I have a gala next week," he said. "Tech industry charity event. We should be seen together. Send me the details. I'll meet you there." "I can send a car." "I have a car, Mr. Kang. I'll drive myself." "It's Dae-hyun. We're married now." Grace looked at him with those penetrating eyes. "We're legally bound by a contract for 6 months. Let's not confuse that with actual intimacy." She closed the bedroom door, and Dae-hyun stood in his own hallway feeling dismissed in his own home. The sensation was so unfamiliar, it took him a moment to even identify it. When had anyone last made him feel unnecessary in his own space? The first 3 weeks became an exercise in escalating frustration. Dae-hyun pulled out every move in his considerable arsenal. He had jewelry delivered, a stunning set of diamond earrings that would have made most women weep with gratitude. Grace donated them to a women's shelter, keeping only the box because it was well-made and reusable. He arranged reservations at Gary Danko, Saison, Atelier Crène, restaurants where people waited months for tables. Grace texted that she was working late and brought home Thai takeout, which she ate alone in her room. He had his assistant purchase an entire wardrobe from Neiman Marcus. Grace sent it all back except for one pair of comfortable flats, which she needed for work anyway. "This isn't working," Dae-hyun told Min-jae over lunch at their usual spot downtown. "She's completely immune to everything I'm trying." "That's because you're trying to buy her compliance," Min-jae said, clearly amused. "Grace Johnson built her reputation on exposing exactly the kind of predatory behavior you're exhibiting. I'm giving her gifts. That's not predatory. You're trying to create obligation, gifts with strings attached. She sees right through it." Dae-hyun's jaw tightened. "Then what do you suggest?" "I suggest you remember that this is a 6-month arrangement. Maybe stop trying to win and just coexist." But coexistence wasn't in Dae-hyun's nature. He escalated his tactics. When gifts didn't work, he tried control. He had his assistant call Grace's office with urgent family matters that required her presence at home. She saw through it immediately and began blocking his assistant's number. He arranged a private concert with a popular R&B artist, certain that would impress her. Grace stayed late at work and missed it entirely. He invited influential people to dinner at the penthouse, hoping social pressure would force her participation. She came home after they'd left, microwaved leftovers, and went to her room. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening. Dae-hyun had cancelled Grace's credit cards. Not maliciously, he told himself, but to force her to use the cards he'd provided to create some financial entanglement that would give him leverage. When she discovered this while trying to pay for groceries, she didn't call him. She simply walked home, left the unpurchased groceries at the store, and waited. Dae-hyun arrived home to find Grace sitting in the living room, hands folded in her lap, expression calm, but eyes blazing with controlled fury. "Restore my accounts," she said quietly. "Now. I thought it would be easier if you thought you could control me financially. You thought if you made me dependent on your money, I'd have to play by your rules." She stood, and despite being several inches shorter than him, somehow seemed to tower over him. "Let me be absolutely clear, Dae-hyun. I'm not for sale. Not for jewelry, not for fancy dinners, not for financial manipulation. I came into this arrangement of my own free will, and I'll leave it the same way. You don't own me, you can't buy me, and you certainly can't control me." "Everyone has a price," Dae-hyun said, but his voice lacked conviction. That's what empty people tell themselves to justify their own emptiness. Grace's words were surgical in their precision. "You have everything, Dae-hyun. Money, success, respect, power, and yet you're hollow. You think acquisition equals fulfillment, but all you've done is fill your life with things that mean nothing. You're used to buying compliance, surrounding yourself with people who tell you what you want to hear because you pay them to. But I'm not them. And the fact that you can't understand that tells me everything I need to know about why you're so desperately unhappy." The words hit Dae-hyun like physical blows. "I'm not unhappy. I have everything I want." "Do you? Then why does winning a meaningless bet matter so much? Why do you need me to bend to your will? Why isn't what you already have enough?" She picked up her bag. "Restore my accounts by morning, or I'm moving back to my apartment and we can maintain this fiction separately. Your choice." She walked to her room and closed the door with controlled precision, not slamming it, which somehow made the gesture more devastating. Dae-hyun stood in his expensive living room surrounded by his expensive things, and for the first time in his adult life, he felt the truth of her words. Empty. He felt empty. He restored her accounts within the hour. The second month brought a shift Dae-hyun didn't fully understand at first. Grace became more present, but somehow more distant. She spent more time in the common areas of the penthouse, but always engaged in her own activities, reading, working on her laptop, talking on the phone with friends and family in a mixture of English and what he eventually identified as Igbo. She was there but untouchable, visible but unreachable. What Dae-hyun didn't know was that Grace was documenting everything. Every unethical business practice she noticed in the papers he left on his desk. Every phone call she overheard about acquisition targets and hostile takeover strategies. Every connection between his company and the wreckage of small businesses left in Kangtek's wake. When his board meeting went unexpectedly sideways, with board members suddenly questioning a deal they'd previously supported unanimously, Dae-hyun was confused. When a merger he'd been cultivating for months fell through due to concerns raised by stakeholders, he was suspicious. When two key investors pulled out of a funding round citing ethical considerations, he was certain. He confronted Grace on a rainy Saturday morning. She was making coffee in the kitchen, moving with unhurried grace, completely unconcerned by his obvious agitation. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "Making coffee. Would you like some? Though I suspect you prefer yours with less cardamom than I use." "You know what I mean. My business deals are falling apart. Investors are questioning practices they've never cared about before. Board members who've rubber-stamped every decision I've made are suddenly developing spines. This is you." Grace added milk to her coffee, steam rising around her face. "Is it? Don't play games with me. I know you have connections to other companies, other analysts. You're poisoning the well, making me look unstable or unethical or what? Telling the truth about your business practices?" She turned to face him fully. "Everything I've done has been completely above board, Dae-hyun. I haven't lied about you or your company. I've simply made sure the right people have access to factual information about your methods. If that's causing problems for you, perhaps the problem is with your methods, not my exposure of them. Why are you doing this? What do you want from me? I want you to understand that control is an illusion. You've spent your entire life believing that if you're smart enough, rich enough, powerful enough, you can manipulate any outcome. But some things can't be controlled. Some consequences can't be avoided. And some debts come due no matter how much money you throw at them. There was something in her tone, a depth of meaning that suggested they were no longer talking about business deals. Dae-hyun felt something shift in his chest, a growing awareness that this was about more than a bet, more than pride, more than winning. "What did I ever do to you? Why do you hate me so much?" he asked quietly. "You really don't know, do you? You destroy people and don't even remember their names." Grace's hand trembled slightly as she set down her coffee cup. "That's almost worse than malice. At least malice acknowledges the humanity of your victims. You just see them as obstacles or opportunities, not as people with families and dreams and lives that matter. Tell me what I did." "Not yet. You're not ready to hear it yet. You're still thinking about how to fix this, how to turn the situation to your advantage, how to regain control. Until you stop thinking like that, the truth won't mean anything to you." She left him standing in the kitchen, and Dae-hyun felt the walls closing in. For the first time since accepting Min-jae's bet, he understood that he might lose. Not just the wager, but something more fundamental. He was losing his certainty, his confidence in his own invincibility, and he was losing to a woman who seemed to understand him better than he understood himself. Worse, he was starting to care. Not about winning, not about the bet, but about Grace herself. The way she moved through the world with quiet dignity. The sound of her laugh during phone calls with her mother. The careful way she chose her words, never saying more than necessary, but making every word count. He found himself listening for her footsteps, noticing when she came home, feeling relieved when she was safely in the next room. This wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't supposed to happen. Month 4 arrived with the first signs of autumn fog rolling into the bay. Dae-hyun hired private investigators, telling himself it was to understand his opponent, to find leverage. But deep down, he knew it was because he needed to understand her. Who was Grace Johnson? What drove her? Why had she really agreed to this arrangement? The investigators were thorough, which is why Dae-hyun should have been prepared for what they uncovered. He wasn't. The report landed on his desk on a Tuesday afternoon. Dae-hyun read it once, then again, then a third time, feeling his world realign with each reading. Grace Johnson, daughter of Chidi and Ngozi Johnson. Father deceased 3 years ago following a heart attack. The timing corresponded exactly with Kang Tech's acquisition of Afrotech Solutions, a small but innovative fintech startup that had been developing mobile banking solutions for underbanked communities. Dae-hyun remembered the acquisition. It had been one of his pivotal successes, a textbook hostile takeover. Afrotech had refused his initial offers, so he'd systematically undermined their funding sources, poached their key employees, and launched a competing product that he sold at a loss until Afrotech couldn't survive. When Chidi James still refused to sell, Dae-hyun had buried the company in legal challenges until they had no choice but to declare bankruptcy. Kang Tech had purchased their patents and technology for pennies on the dollar. The report continued. Chidi James had died 2 weeks after the bankruptcy filing. Cause of death: acute myocardial infarction. His widow, Ngozi, had lost their home. Their son, a sophomore at Stanford, had been forced to drop out due to financial constraints, and Grace, then 25 and working as an intern at a financial consulting firm, had been pregnant at the time. Had been pregnant. Dae-hyun's hands shook as he read the final section. Miscarriage at 16 weeks, attributed to severe stress and emotional trauma. Hospital records showed Grace had been admitted to Highland Hospital in Oakland the same week her father's company officially dissolved. He sat in his office as the sun set over the bay, expensive whiskey untouched on his desk, and felt something crack inside his chest. This wasn't about a bet. This had never been about a bet. Grace had accepted his proposal because she wanted him to feel powerless, to understand what it was like to lose control, to experience even a fraction of what his actions had cost her family. And she'd succeeded. He felt powerless now. Powerless to change the past, powerless to undo the damage, powerless to make this right. When Dae-hyun finally went home that evening, moving like a man underwater, he found Grace in the living room. She took one look at his face and knew immediately. "You found out," she said. It wasn't a question. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice sounded foreign to his own ears, rough with suppressed emotion. Would it have mattered? Would you have believed me, or would you have dismissed it as an unfortunate but necessary cost of doing business? Grace stood, her posture rigid with years of contained pain. "Do you know what it's like to watch your father die knowing there was nothing you could do? To lose your child because some corporation decided your family's livelihood was an acceptable casualty in their pursuit of profit? Grace, my father was a good man. He built Afrotech Solutions to help people like his parents, immigrants who arrived in this country with nothing and struggled to access basic financial services. He wanted to make a difference. He wanted to create something meaningful, and you destroyed it because you could, because it was in your way, because you didn't see him as a person, just as an obstacle." Tears streamed down her face now, years of grief and rage finally breaking through her carefully maintained control. "I was going to name her Chidinma. It means God is good in Igbo. My father was so excited to be a grandfather. He was making plans, buying baby clothes, talking about teaching her about our culture and her heritage. And then you came along and took everything. My father, my baby, my family's future. You took it all." Dae-hyun felt like he was drowning. "I didn't know. If I had known, what? You would have done it differently. Destroyed some other family instead." Grace's laugh was bitter. "Don't lie to yourself, Dae-hyun. You didn't care to know. That's the point. You never asked about the human cost of your business decisions. You never wondered about the families behind the companies you dismantled. You just took what you wanted and moved on to the next conquest. You're right." The words felt like broken glass in his throat. "You're absolutely right. I didn't care. I didn't want to see the people I was hurting because that would have made it harder to do what I was doing. I told myself it was just business, that if I didn't do it, someone else would, that success required ruthlessness. I told myself every lie necessary to justify becoming a monster. And now?" Grace's voice was barely above a whisper. "Now I would give everything I have to undo it, but I can't. I can't bring your father back. I can't give you back your child. I can't restore what I destroyed. All I can do is live with what I've done, and I don't know how to do that." Grace wiped her tears with sharp, angry movements. "I entered this marriage so you could feel a fraction of what you put my family through. I wanted you to experience powerlessness and pain. I wanted to hurt you the way you hurt us. And I have, but it doesn't feel the way I thought it would. It doesn't bring them back. It doesn't heal anything." She walked past him toward her room, then stopped at the doorway. "My father could forgive people. He believed in redemption and second chances. I don't have his grace. Words mean nothing to me, Dae-hyun. My father can't hear your apologies. My baby will never exist. Words are meaningless." She closed the door, leaving Dae-hyun alone with the magnitude of what he'd done. He sank onto the couch and put his head in his hands, and for the first time since he was a child, he wept. The days that followed were torture. Grace became a ghost in the penthouse, physically present but emotionally unreachable. She moved through the space like he didn't exist, preparing meals he couldn't taste, going through daily routines with mechanical precision. When he tried to talk to her, she looked through him as if he were made of glass. The professional sabotage intensified. Dae-hyun's board members started receiving detailed reports about questionable business practices. Key clients began asking uncomfortable questions about Kangtech's ethics. The SEC launched an investigation into several of his acquisitions. Everything was falling apart, and Dae-hyun couldn't bring himself to care. What did any of it matter? He'd built an empire on the ruins of other people's dreams. He'd become wealthy by being willing to destroy lives without thought or remorse. And when finally confronted with the human cost of his success, all his money and power couldn't change what he'd done. He tried apologizing again, cornering Grace in the kitchen one morning. "Please, just talk to me. Tell me how to fix this." She stirred her coffee without looking at him. "Some things can't be fixed. You can only live with them. I can't live like this. Now you understand how my mother felt, how my brother felt, how I felt lying in a hospital bed, knowing I'd lost my baby because of someone else's greed." She finally met his eyes, and the emptiness there was worse than anger. "This is your lesson, Dae-hyun. This is what I wanted you to learn. Helplessness, guilt, the knowledge that your actions had consequences you can never undo. I've learned it. I've learned it. Please, just tell me what I can do." "Nothing. There's nothing you can do. That's the point." She left him standing there, and Dae-hyun felt the last vestiges of his old self crumble. The man who believed he could control any situation, solve any problem, acquire any outcome he desired. That man was dead. In his place was someone he didn't recognize, broken, humbled, desperate for forgiveness he didn't deserve. But Grace was wrong about one thing. There was something he could do. He couldn't change the past, but he could change the future. Dae-hyun started with Afrotech Solutions. He tracked down the patents and technology Kangtech had acquired and established a BOTFE, trust to develop and release the mobile banking platform Chidi James had envisioned, offering it free to underbanked communities. He contacted Ngozi James and arranged an anonymous trust fund that restored her financial security. He reached out to Grace's brother and covered his tuition to return to Stanford, along with funding for graduate school. Then he expanded his efforts. Every company Kangtech had destroyed, every family affected by his ruthless business practices. He made a list and began making amends. Not through lawyers or intermediaries, but personally. He showed up at small businesses, at family homes, looked people in the eyes and said, "I'm sorry, I destroyed something you built. Tell me how to help make it right." Most slammed doors in his face. Some cursed him, a few listened. Slowly, painfully, Dae-hyun began the work of restitution. He restructured Kangtech's entire business model, implementing ethical guidelines that his board initially resisted until he threatened to resign. He established a fund for small businesses affected by hostile takeovers. He made public statements acknowledging his company's harmful practices and committing to change. At home, he stopped trying to make Grace acknowledge him. Instead, he learned. He noticed she took her coffee with cardamom, a tradition from her father. He began leaving a cup for her every morning, prepared exactly right, without expectation or demand for recognition. He observed that she liked the penthouse quiet in the evenings, so he stopped scheduling social events. He saw that she missed her mother's cooking, so he learned to prepare Nigerian dishes from online tutorials, leaving them in the refrigerator without comment. Small gestures, meaningless in the scope of what he'd taken from her, but the only things he could offer. Weeks passed, then a month. Grace watched him with wary, unreadable eyes. She didn't thank him for the coffee or the food. She didn't acknowledge his efforts at restitution, but she stopped avoiding him quite so completely. Sometimes she sat in the living room when he was there instead of retreating to her bedroom. Once, he found a note on the counter next to the empty coffee cup. "Thank you." It was something. One evening, as fog rolled through the city, turning the lights below into fuzzy halos, Grace came into the living room where Dae-hyun sat staring at nothing. "Cancel your meeting tomorrow," she said abruptly. He looked up, startled. "What?" "You have a meeting with investors tomorrow at 2. Cancel it. I want to talk." "I'll cancel it. Of course I'll cancel it." She nodded and started to leave, then turned back. "The coffee, the food, the things you're doing with the business. I see them. I just don't know what to do with them. You don't have to do anything with them. They're not transactional. I'm not trying to buy forgiveness. Then why? Dae-hyun chose his words carefully. Because I have to live with myself. Because I want to be someone different than who I was. Not for you, though I would change for you if I could. But for myself. I don't want to be the person who hurt you anymore. Grace stood in the doorway for a long moment. My father used to say that the measure of a person isn't in never falling, but in how they rise after they fall. I don't know if I can forgive you, Dae-hyun. I don't know if that's even possible, but I see you trying to rise, and maybe that's enough for now. She went to her room, but the door didn't close with its usual finality. Dae-hyun sat in the gathering darkness and felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Hope. The breakthrough came 2 weeks later. Dae-hyun was reviewing documents when Grace appeared with her laptop. "I need your opinion on something," she said, a sentence he'd never heard from her before. She showed him a financial analysis she was preparing, and they spent the next hour discussing it. The conversation flowed naturally, professionally at first, then gradually becoming more personal. They talked about their different approaches to business ethics, their experiences growing up in immigrant communities, the weight of parental expectations. When Grace laughed at something he said, the sound felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. "I forgot you could laugh," Dae-hyun said softly. "I forgot I could laugh around you." She closed her laptop. "I spent so long hating you that I didn't notice when that started to change. You're different now. Really different. I'm trying to be. I know. And that matters." She hesitated, then continued. "I've been thinking about what comes next. The 6 months are almost up." Dae-hyun's chest tightened. "I know. I came into this wanting to hurt you, to make you feel what I felt, and I succeeded, but somewhere along the way, watching you actually change, actually try to make things right, it stopped being about revenge." She met his eyes. "I don't want you to hurt anymore, Dae-hyun. I'm tired of carrying this anger. It's not healing anything. It's not bringing anyone back." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe we could start over. Not forget what happened. I'll never forget. But move beyond it. Build something new instead of staying trapped in what was destroyed. I don't deserve that. Probably not, but my father believed in grace, in giving people chances to be better. Maybe I can try to live up to that belief." She stood, then paused. "Tomorrow. Let's spend tomorrow together. Not as adversaries or as participants in a bet. Just as two people trying to figure out if there's something real here." After she left, Dae-hyun sat motionless, afraid to hope but unable to stop himself. The next day, they walked through Golden Gate Park, the first truly shared experience they'd had since the wedding. They talked about everything and nothing. Her childhood in Oakland, his parents' expectations, dreams they'd had before life got complicated. As they watched the sun set over the Pacific, Grace slipped her hand into his, and Dae-hyun felt his heart stutter. "I'm not ready to say I forgive you," she said quietly. "I might never be ready, but I think I'm ready to try moving forward instead of staying stuck in the past. That's more than I deserve. Stop saying that. If you want to be better, then be better. Don't wallow in guilt. Make the guilt mean something through action." Dae-hyun turned to face her. "I love you. I know I have no right to say that, but it's true. I love who you are. Your strength, your principles, your refusal to compromise yourself. I love that you challenged me, changed me, made me see what I'd become. I don't want this to end at 6 months. I want to spend my life trying to be worthy of you." Grace's eyes glistened with tears. "I came into this marriage to destroy you, but you destroyed yourself and rebuilt into someone I can actually respect, someone I could possibly love if you give me time. I'll give you all the time you need." They stood together as fog rolled in from the ocean, two people who'd hurt each other and been hurt, trying to find a way forward. The shift began with small moments that accumulated like morning dew. 3 days after their conversation at the beach, Dae-hyun found Grace crying in the kitchen at 2 a.m., overwhelmed by memories of her father. Instead of offering empty platitudes, he simply sat beside her, silent and present. When she finally leaned against his shoulder, neither acknowledged it, but something fundamental changed. They began cooking together, whispered. "But I'm falling in love with who you're becoming." "That's enough." Dae-hyun breathed against her hair. "That's more than enough." They built their intimacy in stolen moments. Shared coffee at dawn, hands finding each other across dinner tables, learning to trust again. 6 weeks later, Grace stood in the bathroom, staring at the positive pregnancy test in her trembling hands. Terror and hope warred in her chest. She'd lost a baby once because of trauma and stress, but this time was different. This time, she wasn't alone. This time, she had a partner who would be there. She found Dae-hyun in his office and held up the test without speaking. His face cycled through confusion, recognition, then pure joy. He crossed the room and dropped to his knees, pressing his forehead against her stomach. "I'll be here for everything. Every appointment, every moment. I promise." "I'm scared," Grace whispered. "So am I. But we'll be scared together." She ran her fingers through his hair, and for the first time since her father's death, Grace felt something like peace. They married again 3 months later. This time, the ceremony took place in her mother's church in Oakland, surrounded by family and friends and the people Dae-hyun had helped restore. Gozi James welcomed Dae-hyun with cautious warmth, seeing in his eyes genuine remorse and commitment to her daughter. Korean and Nigerian traditions blended naturally. The Paibek ceremony and the traditional Igba Nankwu, honoring both their heritages. When Min-jae congratulated Dae-hyun, he said, "You were right. This was the best bet I ever made, and the last one I'll ever need." As they left the church, Grace's hand in his, her other hand resting on her growing belly, Dae-hyun looked back at the community that had welcomed him despite everything. He'd come into this thinking he could control the outcome, manipulate the situation, win through strategy and resources. Instead, he'd lost everything that defined him and found something infinitely more valuable. A reason to be better, a partner who challenged him to grow, and a future built not on conquest, but on redemption. They walked into the Oakland afternoon, surrounded by people who believed in second chances, heading toward a future uncertain but hopeful. Dae-hyun had learned that some wounds never fully heal, that forgiveness is a journey rather than a destination, and that true strength lies not in control, but in the courage to change. 6 months ago, he'd accepted a bet to marry someone completely wrong for him. He'd been right about one thing. Grace Johnson had changed him, but she wasn't wrong for him. She was exactly what he needed, even when, especially when, he didn't know it himself. What do you think? Did Grace make the right choice in forgiving and marrying Dae-hyun? Do you believe people can truly change after causing such devastating harm? Or should some actions be unforgivable? Your perspective matters to us. Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your opinion. If this story of redemption, loss, and second chances touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this. Thank you for watching. And remember, sometimes the hardest person to forgive is the one who hurt us most, but sometimes that forgiveness can lead to unexpected healing.